At the church board table, my husband called me too broken to be trusted with the healing fund he had secretly drained, and before his smile finished, the old prayer journal he had mocked began undoing him. Aaron said it in front of 6 elders, our pastor, and the woman he had quietly chosen to replace me. He said my body had made me unreliable. He said grief had made my memory dangerous. He said handing him control was the only merciful choice. What he did not know was that the journal in my lap was not full of feelings. It held dates, names, morning prayers, and one line of proof he had never thought a sick woman would keep. I did not answer him right away. That was the first mistake he wanted from me. Aaron knew how to make silence look like weakness and pain look like confession. He had built that skill over years, one gentle correction at a time. He lowered his voice and said, "Ellie, please don't make this harder on yourself." Every person in that room heard concern. I heard the lock turn again. 2 weeks earlier, that same voice had told me to rest while he moved money out of the account that paid for rides, meals, medicine, and emergency care for people who had nowhere else to ask. To understand why that moment broke something open in me, you have to understand what morning light meant before Aaron turned it into a weapon. The ministry was not large, but it mattered. We helped people through the small, brutal costs nobody sees when someone is trying to heal. Gas cards, clean bedding, a bill paid before shutoff, a warm meal after treatment, a volunteer sitting with someone who was too tired to be alone. I started it after my own long season in and out of hospitals, when I learned that healing is not only medicine. Sometimes healing is someone making sure your lights stay on while your body is fighting. Aaron had stood beside me when we began. He prayed over the first envelope of donations. He cried when the first thank you letter came. That was why the betrayal cut deeper than the missing money. He had not stolen from a fund. He had stolen from a place where people came when they had no strength left to defend themselves. 3 months before that board meeting, I woke before sunrise with my hands shaking so badly I could not button my sweater. I sat at the kitchen table with my prayer journal open and whispered the same kind of prayer I had prayed for years. Lord, touch what hurts. Restore what fear has taken. Give me enough strength for this day. Aaron came in quietly, placed my medicine beside my tea, and kissed the top of my head. He looked like a husband who had learned tenderness through suffering. He looked like proof that God had not left me alone. That morning he asked for the ministry passwords. He said the new donation platform was too much for me while I was recovering. He said he could handle the reports for a month, maybe 2. I wanted to argue, but my body was tired and my spirit was tired of needing help. I had spent so long being the strong one for other people that any offer of relief felt like mercy. I gave him the passwords. I gave him the file cabinet key. I gave him the donor list. I did not know I had just given him the first pieces of a story he would later use against me. Aaron did not change everything at once. That was part of his gift. Sudden control frightens people. Slow control feels like protection. First, he offered to answer emails so I could sleep later. Then he started replying, as if the ministry decisions came from both of us. Then he began using phrases that made people comfortable: stewardship, accountability, sustainable leadership. Nobody at church heard a man taking over his wife's work. They heard a responsible husband bringing structure to a fragile season. Even I heard that at first. I wanted to believe it because believing it hurt less than asking why he needed so much access so quickly. The first warning came from Renee, a Thursday volunteer who never wasted words. She called me while I was sitting in the clinic parking lot after a checkup. Her voice was low. "Ellie, did you approve turning away the family on Mercer Street?" I told her no. I did not even know the request had come in. Renee went quiet for 1 second too long. Then she said, "Aaron told me you reviewed it and said the ministry was tightening its criteria." That sentence did not just confuse me, it embarrassed me. Someone had needed help, and my name had been used to close the door. When I asked Aaron about it that night, he did not deny it. He did something smarter. He brought me a folder. He showed me a printed request with notes in the margin. The notes looked like mine if you only glanced at them. Short phrases, soft refusals. A small mark I often used when I needed follow-up. "You were exhausted that day," he said. "You probably don't remember." He sounded sad, not angry. That made it harder to fight him. I stared at the page and felt my own mind become a room I could not trust. I had no memory of writing those notes. I also had no proof I had not written them. That night, I opened my prayer journal and wrote down what happened. Renee called. Aaron showed folder. I did not approve refusal. Ask again when clear. Then I prayed for the family on Mercer Street and asked God to forgive any door that had closed because I was too tired to guard it. The second warning came through a bank alert I was not supposed to receive. Aaron had changed the primary email on the account, but an old notification still came to my phone. It said a transfer had been completed after midnight. The amount was large enough to pay several months of assistance. I stared at the number until it blurred. Then I called the bank from the hallway so Aaron would not hear. The representative asked for verification, paused, and said the transfer had been authorized by an approved signer. She would not say more. In plain words, money meant for people in crisis had moved, and my own name had been left close enough to the door to take blame. I did not confront Aaron that time. That was my first quiet act of resistance. I saved the alert. I wrote the date in my journal. I took a picture of the old authorization card in the file cabinet before it disappeared. I did not know what the transfer meant yet, and I knew Aaron would have an answer ready before I had a full question formed. So I waited. Waiting felt like weakness, but it was not. It was the first time I let silence serve me instead of him. Renee became the first person who shifted the ground under me. She did not promise to save me. She did not tell me to blow everything open. She simply began forwarding every ministry email she received to my personal account with one plain note. For your records. Because of her, I began seeing the pattern. Requests denied in my name. Donors thanked by Aaron only. Volunteers told I was stepping back for medical reasons. A new committee formed without a vote. The new committee had one name on it that made my stomach drop. Celia Voss. Celia was not a villain from a cheap story. She was efficient, polished, and good at making hard decisions sound holy. She had joined the church the year my health collapsed, and she quickly became the person people trusted with complicated things. Aaron said she was helping him stabilize the ministry. Renee said Celia had been asking which donors gave because of me and which gave because of the church. That was not a volunteer question. That was a takeover question. When I asked Aaron why Celia needed donor information, he smiled like I had misunderstood something simple. She has grant experience, he said. If Morning Light is going to survive, it can't run on your personal relationships forever. There it was again. The little blade under the soft cloth. Your relationships, your emotions, your fragile way of doing things. He made my care sound unprofessional. He made his ambition sound like rescue. Then he set his phone face down when a message came in, and I saw Celia's name before the screen went dark. I wish I could say I felt rage first. I did not. I felt shame. That is the part people outside betrayal do not always understand. When someone you trusted uses your weakness against you, your first instinct is not always to fight. Sometimes your first instinct is to hide the fact that you trusted them. But that night, beneath the shame, something steadier rose. I copied every journal entry that mentioned ministry decisions into a separate file. The journal had become more than comfort. It had become a witness I had accidentally been keeping while I begged God to heal me. The third warning came on a Sunday morning, right after service. Pastor Glenn asked if I was ready for the transition announcement. He said it kindly, as if I had already agreed. My chest tightened. What transition? I asked. He looked uncomfortable and glanced toward Aaron across the lobby. That glance told me more than his answer. Aaron had already moved the story into other people's mouths. By the time I heard it, it sounded official. Pastor Glenn said Aaron had explained my condition had worsened and that I wanted a reduced role before any mistakes harmed the ministry. He said the board only needed to ratify what Aaron called my request. There it was. The trap had a date now. A board meeting. A vote. A public version of my surrender. If I protested, I would look unstable. If I stayed quiet, I would lose the ministry. The transition email hit every donor's inbox before I had even answered Pastor Glenn, and Aaron had put my name at the bottom of it. He had not just announced that I was stepping back. He had made it look like I had thanked him for rescuing Morning Light from my weakness. My phone began buzzing with replies from people I had prayed with at hospital beds, kitchen tables, and funeral homes. "Rest, Ellie," one woman wrote. "Aaron says this is best." That sentence hurt more than the announcement because it told me his lie was already working. I read the email twice, then saved it before Aaron could revise it. The wording was careful. It said I had entered a season of healing. It said Aaron and Celia would protect the ministry's integrity. It said the board would meet the next morning to affirm a temporary operating structure. It did not say a large transfer had left the account after midnight. It did not say Renee had been blocked from helping a sick man on Mercer Street. It did not say I had never written that email. Aaron had changed tactics. He was no longer hiding what he was doing. He was wrapping it in care. I called Pastor Glenn before fear could talk me out of it. He answered on the third ring, and his voice was tired before I said my name. "Ellie, I was hoping we could talk after tomorrow's meeting," he said. "Aaron told me you might be upset today." That one sentence showed me how early Aaron had prepared him. He had not only stolen control, he had warned people that my reaction would prove I was unstable. I told Pastor Glenn I had not approved the announcement. I told him money had been moved without my knowledge. I told him I had records. He went quiet, but not in the way I needed. "Ellie," he said softly, "if this is about the transition wording, we can adjust the tone." I heard the trap in that kindness. If I let him reduce theft to tone, Aaron would win before the meeting started. I said, "This is not about tone. Someone used my name to move authority and money. I need the vote paused." Pastor Glenn breathed into the phone like a man standing between two fires. Then he said the words Aaron had planted for him. "Can you bring something clear? Not impressions, not concern. Something clear enough that I can put it in front of 6 elders." That was the first friction. The truth existed, but it was not yet heavy enough in another person's hands. I had the bank alert. I had Renee's forwarded emails. I had the photo of the old authorization card. I had my journal. But Aaron had the official story, the donor list, Celia's polished language, and the pastor's fear of public disorder. I said I would bring proof. Pastor Glenn did not promise to stop the vote. He only said, "If you have something, get it to me before the meeting tomorrow morning." Then he added, "Please do not confront Aaron tonight." I almost laughed. Aaron had already confronted me in front of the whole church without raising his voice. He had taken my name, my work, and the ministry's healing fund, then asked everyone to call it protection. But I did not argue with Pastor Glenn. I thanked him and hung up because I had learned something important. If I walked into the meeting with pain, Aaron would call it illness. If I walked in with proof, he would have to change his lie in public. Renee called 2 minutes later. She did not greet me. She said, "They locked me out." Her voice had no softness left in it. I tried to open the volunteer request log, and my password failed. Then Celia sent me a message saying all care requests now go through her review team. I asked if she still had the forwarded emails. "Yes," she said, "and I have something worse." She told me a donor named Maribel Keene had called her that morning, angry and confused. Maribel had given money for emergency medical needs after her sister's treatments fell behind. Aaron had personally thanked her. Now Maribel had received a donor update, saying her funds had been moved into a strategic restoration reserve. That phrase sounded harmless until Renee explained what it meant. Money given for sick people could now be used for administrative projects. Celia had not just helped Aaron change names on a committee. She had helped him change the purpose of the money. That made the midnight transfer feel less like panic and more like a plan. Aaron was not only removing me, he was turning a ministry built for wounded people into a controlled account with a softer label. Renee wanted to call every donor herself. I told her not yet. If we moved too loudly, Aaron would say we were frightening people with incomplete information. Renee hated that, but she understood. "Then what do you need?" she asked. I looked at the journal on my table, the bank alert on my screen, and the email with my stolen name under it. "I need the original purpose records," I said. "The ones that show restricted gifts." Renee went quiet. Then she said, "Aaron took the binder from the office last week." That answer hit hard. But it also told me where to press next. There was one person who might know what Aaron had done with the records. His name was Marcus Bell, the part-time bookkeeper who came in twice a month and hated conflict more than anyone I knew. Marcus was not loyal to Aaron. He was loyal to clean numbers and quiet rooms. That made him useful, but not easy. I called him, and he did not answer. I texted him one sentence. If Morning Light restricted funds were moved, your name may be on reports you did not approve. He called back in less than a minute. Marcus spoke low, like someone could hear him through the phone. I told Aaron those donor categories could not be changed without written consent, he said. He said Celia had compliance experience, and the board had already discussed it. I asked if he had seen any written consent from me. Marcus hesitated too long. That pause told me he had seen something. Finally, he said, "There was a scanned authorization packet. Your signature was on it." I felt the room shrink around that sentence. Aaron had not only used my name in an email, he had created paperwork. I asked Marcus to send it to me. He said he could not. Aaron had moved the files into a shared board drive that Marcus could view, but not download. That was the second friction. The proof was close enough to describe, but not close enough to hold. Marcus was scared because his bookkeeping notes had been used to make the changes look legitimate. He had his own reason to help me now. If Aaron's version stood, Marcus would look careless or complicit. I told him to write down exactly what he had seen. Marcus said, "Ellie, if I do that, Aaron will know it came from me." I said, "If you do nothing, he may let it fall on you." That sentence changed him. Not fully, but enough. Marcus said he had one thing he could send without entering the board drive. He had the old monthly reconciliation sheet from before Aaron locked the files. It showed donor restrictions, account balances, and the two-signature rule for transfers over a set amount. He sent it while we were still on the phone. When the file opened, I saw my own handwritten note scanned at the bottom. No reserve transfer without ministry founder approval and donor purpose review. It was not enough to stop the vote by itself, but it made Aaron's midnight transfer harder to explain. Then Aaron came home early. I heard his key in the door, and every open file on my laptop suddenly felt dangerous. I ended the call with Marcus and closed the screen halfway. Not because I wanted to hide like a child, but because Aaron had trained me to feel guilty for knowing what he had done. He walked in carrying a paper folder and the gentle face he used when he wanted witnesses. "Pastor Glenn said you called him," he said. He did not ask. He accused me with sadness. "Ellie, this is what I was afraid of." I stood by the table with the old prayer journal under my hand. Aaron looked at it and then looked away too quickly. That was his first mistake of the night. He knew the journal mattered. He just did not know how much of him was in it. He set the folder on the table and slid it toward me. "I brought you something before this gets worse," he said. "A care agreement." The title on the first page said it was voluntary. The body said something else. If I signed it, I would agree not to contact donors, volunteers, bank staff, or board members without Aaron or Pastor Glenn present. I would agree that my health had affected my judgment. I would agree to rest while the new leadership structure protected the ministry. It was not a care agreement. It was a gag order with a Bible verse on the cover. I asked who wrote it. Aaron said, "Celia helped with language so no one misunderstands." That answer mattered. Celia was no longer a helpful outsider. Her name was now attached to a document designed to silence me before the vote. I did not sign. I opened the folder slowly and photographed every page while Aaron watched. His face changed for half a second. Not anger, calculation. He reached for the papers and said, "That is not necessary." I moved them out of his reach and said, "If it is loving, it can be documented." That was the first time that night I saw his control slip. He recovered fast. "You are making this adversarial," he said. "I am trying to keep you from humiliating yourself tomorrow." My phone buzzed on the table. Renee's name lit up the screen. Aaron smiled, but the smile was thin now. "She is feeding this, isn't she?" he said. "Renee has never respected boundaries." I picked up the phone and answered on speaker. Renee did not know Aaron was there, so her words came clean and fast. "Ellie, Maribel just forwarded me the donor update. It says you personally approved the reserve transfer after a private review with Celia." I looked straight at Aaron. He stayed still, but his eyes moved to the folder in my hand. Renee kept talking. "Maribel says she never gave consent to change the purpose. She wants to know why your name is on this." I told Renee to forward everything to my personal email, Pastor Glenn, Marcus, and Maribel together. If Aaron had survived by separating people, then I would start by putting everyone on the same chain. Aaron said, Hang up before that woman poisons you against your own husband. And Renee answered from my phone speaker. Too late. Maribel already put her complaint in writing. The room went silent because Aaron had not known the donor had written anything down. Until that second, he had treated Maribel's anger like a loose rumor he could smooth over. A written complaint changed the shape of the night. It meant the story had left our house. It meant the healing fund had a witness with a name, a date, and a restricted gift Aaron could not explain away with soft words about my recovery. I kept the phone on the table between us. My hands were weak, but my voice came out clear enough. Renee, do not send anything to me only. Send it to Pastor Glenn too. Aaron moved fast then, not toward the phone, but toward the story. Ellie is exhausted, he said loudly, as if Renee and Maribel needed to hear him caring for me. She is not able to process donor complaints this late. Renee did not argue with him. That was her gift. She did not waste time fighting the fog. She said, Pastor Glenn is copied, Marcus is copied. Maribel included her original designation note. She gave for recovery grants, not office restructuring. One sentence, one clean blade. The money had a purpose. Aaron had changed that purpose, and my name had been used to make the change look approved. Aaron's face did not collapse. That would have been easier. Instead, he became calmer, which scared me more. He sat down across from me and folded the unsigned care agreement back into its folder. You do understand what she is doing, he said. Renee wants control of Morning Light. She has always wanted to be more than a volunteer. It was a new tactic. He stopped trying to silence the complaint and started dirtying the messenger. He knew Pastor Glenn could forgive confusion. He knew the board could forgive sloppy records. But if he could make Renee look ambitious, then every document she sent would arrive with a stain already placed on it. Renee heard him. I do not want control, she said. I want the people who were promised help to know where their gifts went. Then she lowered her voice. Ellie, Marcus says the scan is on the board drive, but the folder name changed this afternoon. That was the new piece. The authorization packet still existed, but someone had moved it. The proof was not gone. It was being hidden inside a system Aaron controlled. My prayer journal sat near my elbow. I pulled it close and opened to the week Aaron claimed I approved the new account access. The page was already marked. I had written 3 lines that morning. Fever returned. No meetings. Psalm 147. He heals the broken-hearted. I turned the journal toward Aaron. You said I signed that packet on the 8th. Aaron glanced at the page and smiled without warmth. A prayer journal is not a legal record. No, I said, but it tells me where to look. That was the first time his calm cracked. Only for a breath. Only in the corner of his mouth. But I saw it. He had expected tears. He had expected me to defend my feelings. He had not expected me to use my weakness like a map. Renee stayed on the line while I called Marcus from the house phone. He answered on the 4th ring, whispering like someone standing where he should not be. I can't talk long, he said. Celia asked me to come in early and clean up the shared folders before the board packet goes out. There it was. Celia was no longer just polishing Aaron's takeover. She was handling the records before the board saw them. Marcus said the authorization scan had been renamed under Wellness Transition Support, and my stomach tightened because the phrase sounded gentle enough to bury anything. He said there were 2 versions. One was a clean scan with my signature page. The other had metadata showing it was uploaded 3 days after the date written on the form. I had to stop him. Say that slower. Marcus breathed hard into the phone. The packet says you signed on the 8th, but the file was created after that. The file trail does not match the paper date. Renee said, Marcus, send the file trail. Marcus said, if I send it from my login, they'll know. His fear was not noble, but it was useful. Marcus did not want to save me because he loved justice. He wanted to keep Aaron and Celia from making him the person who lost the wrong records. His own risk made him careful. His own risk made him tell the truth in pieces he could prove. Aaron stood. This has crossed a line. He reached for my house phone, and I pulled it back before he touched it. It was not dramatic. It was just the first boundary my body could manage. Do not take another device from me, I said. He looked at my hand around the phone, then at my face, and his voice softened into the tone he used when church members were nearby. Ellie, listen to yourself. You are turning a ministry matter into a marital crisis. That sentence told me exactly how he planned to survive. If he could shrink stolen money into marriage tension, then Pastor Glenn would ask us to pray and wait. If he could make forged authority sound like stress between husband and wife, the board would protect peace instead of people. I told Marcus, do not send from your login. Can you print the folder index? Marcus paused. Yes. Can you photograph the screen with the file dates? Another pause. Yes. But I need 10 minutes. Aaron laughed once, low and sharp. This is absurd. I kept my eyes on the journal. Marcus, send the photos to Renee first. Renee, forward them to Pastor Glenn and Maribel together. Keep the chain clean. Aaron changed again. He stopped performing concern and went for the old wound. After everything I carried while you were sick, he said. This is how you repay me. That hit deeper than the threats. Because there were nights when he had carried water to my bed. There were mornings when he had driven me to appointments. There were days when I could not stand long enough to lead the prayer call. And he had read my notes aloud. He had not been pretending every second. That was the cruelest part. His care had been real enough to make his control feel like debt. For years, I had confused being grateful with being silent. I almost apologized. The word rose in my throat by habit. Then Renee said my name, soft but firm. Ellie, the first photo just came through. I looked down. Marcus had sent a picture of a computer screen. The folder title was bland. The date was not. The packet Aaron claimed I signed during my worst week had been uploaded days later, after the bank alert, after the donor restrictions changed, after Celia joined the transition team. The photo was blurry, but it was enough to show a path. Not the whole road. Not victory. A path. Aaron saw the image reflected in the dark phone screen. He did not ask what it was. He knew. He moved to the front door and opened it. I am going to Pastor Glenn before this becomes uglier, he said. That was not retreat. That was interception. He wanted to reach the pastor first, wounded and righteous, with his version already arranged. He wanted to make my evidence look like an attack born from fever, fear, and Renee's influence. If you go now, I said, tell him Maribel's complaint is already in his inbox. Aaron turned back. You think one donor understands what it takes to keep a ministry alive? There was his logic, finely spoken without polish. In Aaron's, he censored donors gave to a mission, and he became the mission because he believed he was the only one strong enough to run it. After he left, the house did not feel peebo. It felt breached. I locked the door and sat down before my legs gave out. Renee stayed on the line without filling the quiet. That helped more than comfort would have. Then she said, we need one more thing before morning. I already knew. The photos proved the file trail was wrong, but they did not prove who used my name. The board could still call it confusion. Pastor Glenn could still call it a process issue. Aaron could still say he was protecting the ministry during my illness. The signature page, I said. Renee answered, yes, and the denial emails in your name. Side by side. I opened the forwarded messages Renee had sent earlier. One email told a family there were no funds available for medical transport. It carried my name at the bottom. I remembered that day. I had been asleep under a fever blanket while Aaron told me to rest and let him handle things. Another email told Maribel her restricted gift had been reallocated for continuity of care. It carried my name too. The phrase was Celia's style, not mine. My own ministry language had always been plain because desperate people do not need polished fog. They need to know whether help is coming. Then my phone buzzed again. Celia had emailed the volunteers. The subject line read, temporary pause on external communications. The message told volunteers not to discuss donor concerns, financial questions, or leadership transition details outside approved channels. It said this protected my healing. It said Morning Light needed unity. It did not mention Maribel. It did not mention the shifted money. It did not mention that my name had been used while I was too sick to answer for myself. Celia's tactic was clean. She did not deny the fire. She closed the doors and called the smoke unity. I forwarded that email to Pastor Glenn with one sentence. This was sent after a donor complaint about restricted funds, and after I refused to sign Aaron's care agreement. I attached the photo of the agreement. I attached the journal page from the 8th. I attached Marcus's screen photo. My hand shook each time I pressed send, not because I doubted the truth, but because sending it meant I could not crawl back into private pain. Pastor Glenn's reply came 14 minutes later. It was shorter than I expected. Ellie, I have received these materials. Please come to the board meeting tomorrow morning. Bring originals. Do not forward anything else until we meet. I read it twice. It was not trust. It was not dismissal. It was a door, cracked open with a chain still on it. Aaron had reached him then. I could hear it in the caution. Pastor Glenn was trying to slow the spread before he understood the wound. But he had not told me to stay home. That mattered. My body wanted sleep so badly I felt sick with it. But there was one more call to make. I called Maribel Keene myself. She answered with no greeting. "Did you approve that transfer?" she asked. "No," I said, "and I am sorry your gift was used under my name." Maribel was quiet. Then she said, "My sister missed 3 treatments waiting for that grant. I gave because your letter said no one would be turned away quietly." The words landed in me like a debt I had not chosen but still had to face. Aaron had not only stolen authority from me, he had put my name between hurting people and the help they were promised. Before we ended the call, Maribel said, "I am sending my original designation note to the full board before morning." I thanked her, hung up, and placed my journal beside the printed evidence. Then I sat in the dark kitchen and understood the real cost of the next day. I was not walking into that room to prove I was strong. I was walking in to prove that being weak had never made me theirs to use. Aaron was already telling the board I was too confused to know what I had signed when I walked in with the original prayer journal under my arm. He stopped mid-sentence, and for one clean second, the room heard the truth before anyone named it. He had told them I was resting at home. He had told them I had agreed to stay away for the sake of peace. Now I was standing there with the dates, the donor complaint, and the care agreement he had tried to hide behind the word healing. Pastor Glenn rose first, not fast enough to look brave, but fast enough to keep Aaron from controlling the next breath. "Ellie," he said, "thank you for coming." Celia sat beside Aaron with a folder already open and a pen in her hand, as if the meeting had been designed to move without me. 3 board members looked from my journal to Aaron's face. Nobody smiled. Nobody welcomed me like a founder. That hurt more than I expected, but I did not let it become the main thing. If I let my pain lead, Aaron would use it as proof. I placed the journal, the printed donor complaint, and the photo of the care agreement on the table. "I did not send the donor email," I said. "I did not approve the midnight transfer. I did not sign a leave agreement. And I did not ask Aaron or Celia to speak for me." My voice shook once on Celia's name because that betrayal was newer. Aaron had a history with me. Celia had access because I trusted her with the small things. She had turned those small things into doors. Aaron folded his hands like a man about to pray, and that old habit almost pulled me backward. For years, that posture meant he wanted calm. Now it meant he wanted witnesses. "Ellie is exhausted," he said softly. "This is exactly what I warned you about. She has been reading isolated documents without context. She is hurting, and she is turning that hurt into suspicion." He did not deny the documents. He made my ability to read them the problem. Pastor Glenn did not look at Aaron. He looked at me. "Show us one thing at a time," he said. "Start with the donor complaint." That sentence changed the air. It did not clear me. It did not accuse Aaron. But it stopped the meeting from becoming a performance about my health. It made the board look at paper instead of tone. I opened Maribel Keene's complaint and read the line that mattered. Her gift was restricted for recovery grants, and she had not approved any change. Celia leaned in before I finished. "Maribel has misunderstood the category," she said. "The reserve still supports restoration. We simply grouped several restricted intentions under a broader restoration strategy." She said it smoothly, like the words had already been tested on someone else. A board member named Denise asked, "Did Maribel give written permission for that broader use?" Celia's pen stopped. It was a tiny thing, but it was the first visible crack in her speed. Aaron answered for her. "Donors often use emotional language," he said. "Our job is to steward the mission, not be trapped by every phrase." That was when Marcus Bell stepped into the doorway with a folder pressed against his chest. He looked like a man who had rehearsed leaving and failed. Aaron saw him and straightened. Celia saw him and closed her folder. Marcus had been afraid of being blamed for the records. Now his fear had walked into the room with him. Pastor Glenn said, "Marcus, were you asked to attend?" Marcus swallowed hard. "No," he said, "but I was named in the revised packet as the person who reconciled the transfer. I did not reconcile it before it moved. I only saw it after the bank alert." The room went still because that was a new fact. Aaron had not only moved the money. Someone had placed Marcus under the transfer after the fact. Marcus had not come to save me. He had come because his own name had been turned into cover. Celia shifted first because she understood paper faster than Aaron understood people. Marcus had access to drafts, she said. There were multiple working versions. He may be confusing a draft notation with a final record. Marcus pulled one page from his folder. His hand shook, but his words did not. The final packet says I reviewed the transfer at 9:10 p.m. The file history shows the packet was created after midnight. He laid the page down and stepped back, as if the paper might burn him. For a moment, I thought the board would finally see the whole shape. Then Aaron changed tactics. He stopped sounding wounded. He sounded firm. "This is why I asked for executive discretion," he said. "A ministry cannot be governed by frightened staff and a founder who is not medically steady." He looked at Pastor Glenn, not at me. "We are not just discussing money, we are discussing whether Morning Light can survive Ellie's decline." There it was. He took the forged packet, the donor complaint, and the file history, and he wrapped them all in my body. The old shame hit me hard. I had been weak. I had missed meetings. I had let Aaron answer calls when I could not sit upright. I had thanked him for it. That was the emotional hook he still had in me. He knew I hated being seen as someone people had to carry. He knew I might apologize for the weight before I defended myself against the theft. I put my palm on the prayer journal and let the dated cover steady me. The journal was not a weapon when I wrote in it. It had become one because the truth had dates. "I was sick," I said. I was not absent from my own conscience. Denise looked down at the journal. Pastor Glenn asked to see the entry for the date on the authorization packet. I opened to the marked page. The entry was simple. I had written that I was home, feverish, and praying for the recovery families because I could not attend the donor update call. I had also written that Aaron said he would postpone all financial decisions until I returned. The room heard the practical meaning before anyone explained it. If my own note was true, the packet's date was false. Aaron smiled then, and that scared me more than his anger. "I'm glad you brought that up," he said. Celia slid a small recorder from her folder and placed it on the table. My stomach dropped before it played because I had not known there was another object in the room. Celia pressed the button. My own voice filled the silence, thin and tired, saying, "Use whatever is needed for restoration. I trust you to carry it while I'm down." The sentence hit the board like a door slamming. Marcus looked at me with panic. Denise leaned back. Pastor Glenn closed his eyes for half a second. Aaron did not look pleased. He looked relieved. That was worse. He had saved this until the evidence began to touch him. He had let me walk in with originals because he believed one clipped piece of my voice could make every document look like confusion. "That was a private prayer call," I said, but the words sounded too small against the recording. Celia pressed stop. "It was a leadership call," she said. Ellie authorized flexible use in her own words. I knew the call she had cut. It was not about donor restrictions. It was the night 3 families were waiting for help, and I had prayed with Aaron after he said he was overwhelmed. I had told him to use whatever pastoral support was needed for restoration while I was down. I had not told him to move restricted funds. I had not told him to rewrite a donor's gift. But the clip had enough of my voice to make a lie feel familiar. Aaron leaned toward me now, gentle again. "Ellie, you do not remember the full call," he said. "That is not your fault. He made the knife soft." "He always did," Celia added. "The board needs to decide whether memory or recorded authorization carries more weight." That sentence was meant to finish me. It gave the board a clean choice, and clean choices are dangerous when one side has been edited. Then the meeting room door opened. Renee walked in with her phone in one hand and a printed email in the other. She did not burst in. She did not apologize for interrupting. She looked at Pastor Glenn and said, "Maribel just sent the original donor note to the full board chain. And there is one more problem. The email Ellie supposedly sent went to an old address Maribel stopped using last year." Celia's face changed before Aaron's did. Celia had managed lists. Celia knew what that meant. If the donor email had gone to an old address, then the message had been built from stale records, not from a living donor conversation. Pastor Glenn checked his phone. One board member did the same. Another whispered, "I have it." The meeting had a new center now, not my emotion, not Aaron's concern, not Celia's careful labels. A donor had provided her own trail, and the address problem pointed back to the person who used the old list. Renee did not look at me for thanks. She looked at Celia. That gave Renee her own payoff. She had been locked out, but she had known the donor list better than the people who stole it. Celia recovered fast. "Old addresses remain in the archive," she said. "That proves nothing," Denise answered. "It proves the donor did not confirm the change." Celia's mouth tightened. Aaron saw Celia losing the paper argument, so he moved to the moral one. "We are spending sacred time attacking volunteers and staff," he said. "Is this who we are now?" He was trying to make accountability sound cruel. He was trying to make silence sound holy. That trick had worked on me for years. This time, Pastor Glenn did not let the word sacred pass unchallenged. "Sacred money still has restrictions," he said. "Sacred trust still needs records." Marcus spoke again, barely above the table. "There is another version of the packet." Celia turned toward him too quickly. Marcus continued. "One version has Ellie's scanned signature page attached. One version does not. The version without it was saved first." Aaron said, "Marcus, be very careful." Marcus looked at Aaron, and fear crossed his face. Then he looked at the board. "I am being careful," he said. "That is why I printed the file path." The file path was not dramatic by itself. It was a line of plain text, a trail of folders and dates. But it did something the recording could not do. It showed sequence. First, there was a packet without my signature. Later, there was a packet with my signature. The board did not need a technical lecture to understand the danger. Something had been added after the fact. The question was who added it, and why the added page carried my name. Celia made her next move against Marcus. "If Marcus accessed both versions, then Marcus could have altered either one," she said. Marcus went pale. I understood then why he had been so afraid. Celia had not only used his name as cover, she had kept him close enough to blame. Aaron looked almost grateful for the opening. "We are not here to put a young bookkeeper on trial," he said, "but we cannot pretend fear makes someone reliable." Celia slid her folder toward Pastor Glenn and said Marcus had built the false file trail himself. Marcus answered by placing a disabled login notice on top of her papers. The room went still because that one page changed the shape of the accusation. Pastor Glenn held up one hand before Aaron could take the room back. "One item at a time," he said again, but his voice was tighter now. "Marcus, explain what this notice means in plain language." Marcus swallowed hard and kept his eyes on the table. "My access to the donor folders was suspended at 6:12 p.m. on the 9th, he said. "The final signature page was added to the packet after that. I could not have added it from my account." He tapped the notice once, not as a flourish, but as a boundary. "Somebody used my name in the folder notes after my login was already locked." That was the first time the board heard the accusation without Aaron's fog around it. Someone had moved restricted money. Someone had added my signature page later. Someone had written Marcus's name into a trail he could not have made. The harm was no longer a marital misunderstanding or a sick woman's confusion. It was a set of actions, and each action had a time on it. Celia recovered first because Celia always recovered fast. "Access notices are not proof of innocence," she said. "There are shared machines, there are cached sessions, there are routine corrections. We all know how messy ministry files can be." She turned toward Pastor Glenn, not toward Marcus, because she was performing for authority. "This is exactly why we should pause. Ellie is exhausted, Marcus is frightened, Renee is inflaming donors. We are turning a healing ministry into a courtroom." Then she softened her voice. That is not what Ellie would want if she were well. That sentence hit me harder than the folder. Not because it was clever, but because it was familiar. Aaron had used that same shape for years. If I objected, I was tired. If I asked questions, I was anxious. If I remembered something clearly, I was clinging to stress. Illness had become a leash in his hands. Celia had learned how to hold the other end. I put my palm on my prayer journal and kept it there because the old version of me would have defended my heart first. The new version of me protected the record. I said, "Do not speak for what I would want. Compare the dates." Pastor Glenn looked at me for a long moment, and I saw his caution fighting with his conscience. He had wanted this to be a process failure. A process failure could be repaired with a policy. A forged authorization could not. He opened Maribel Keene's designation note and placed it beside the packet. Renee had brought the original donor note in a clear sleeve, and the board secretary had written the time it arrived on the outside. That small act mattered. For the first time all morning, the evidence was not being passed through Celia's hands. Pastor Glenn read only the necessary line aloud. Maribel's gift was restricted for recovery grants, not office restructuring, not general restoration, not whatever Aaron later decided restoration meant. He put that note beside the email Celia claimed had gone out under my name. The email had been sent to an old address Maribel no longer used. Renee said, "Maribel says she never received it." Aaron immediately said, "Donors forget emails all the time." Renee did not flinch. "She did not forget this one," she said. "The address used was removed from her donor record last spring. That was the new crack." Marcus looked up. "The old address is in the archive export," he said. "Not in the live donor profile." Pastor Glenn turned to him. "Say that again." Marcus took a breath. If someone used the live donor record, the newer address would show. If someone pulled from an old export, the old address would show. He pointed at the donor email. This was not sent from the current record. Aaron changed tactics again. He leaned back, lowered his voice, and stopped sounding angry. That was more dangerous. "Pastor, I need to say something painful," he said. "Ellie has been saying for months that she cannot carry the burden. She asked me to help make hard decisions. She may not remember every conversation because she was sick, but I was there. I was the one getting her water at night. I was the one answering calls when she could not lift her head. I was the one protecting this ministry while everyone else enjoyed her name." He looked around the table with wounded patience. "Now I am being punished for obeying my wife's own plea for help." There it was, the emotional lever. He did not need everyone to believe every document. He needed them to feel cruel for questioning him. He needed my weakness to become his credential. He needed my gratitude to become his cover. A month earlier, that speech would have folded me in half because part of it was true. He had brought water. He had answered calls. He had stood between me and noise when my body could not bear noise. That was what made the betrayal harder to name. He had mixed care with control until I felt guilty separating them. Pastor Glenn turned to me. "Ellie, did you ask Aaron to make financial decisions without board review?" The room waited for a speech, but I had learned not to give Aaron extra fabric to cut. I opened the prayer journal to the page with the date Aaron kept using. My handwriting was weak there, uneven and cramped. I read the line I had written after a fever had broken. "Aaron says he will postpone financial decisions until I can sit up and review them." I closed the journal halfway but kept my finger on the page. That is what I remembered that night. That is what I wrote before any complaint came. Celia reached for the journal. "May I see the original?" she asked. Her tone was smooth, but her hand was too fast. I pulled it back before she touched it. The old me would have apologized for seeming rude. I did not apologize. "No," I said. "Pastor Glenn may view it at the table. The secretary may photograph the page with the date and the cover in the same frame. The original stays with me." That simple refusal moved something in the room. It was not loud, but it was clean. Aaron had expected my journal to become another loose object in his system. I kept it out of his system. The board secretary stood and took the photos in front of everyone. She named each photo as she took it. Date page, cover, inside inscription, full table view. Those plain words sounded almost boring, but they protected me more than any dramatic speech could have. Marcus watched her do it and seemed to breathe for the first time since he entered. Then Pastor Glenn asked for the recording again. Celia's face changed by a fraction. She had wanted the clipped audio to strike once and stay emotional. She did not want it handled like evidence. "It is painful to replay," she said. "Ellie was weak. I do not think we need to expose her again." Pastor Glenn said, "Play the file from the beginning." Celia did not move. That was the relevant portion. He looked at her hand near her phone. "Play the file from the beginning, or send the full recording to the board secretary now." The room sharpened around that sentence. Celia unlocked her phone slowly. Aaron said, "Pastor, this is becoming invasive." Pastor Glenn did not raise his voice. "Aaron, the recording was introduced by Celia to prove authorization. If it proves authorization, the full context matters. If it does not, we need to know that too." Celia sent the file to the secretary, but the delay had already spoken. The secretary opened it on the meeting laptop, and the first sound was not my sentence about restoration. It was my coughing. Then Celia's voice came through, soft and coaxing, asking me if I trusted Aaron to carry things while I was down. My stomach turned because I remembered that call now. I had been half asleep, feverish, and Celia had called it a prayer check-in. She had not said she was recording. She had not said donor funds. She had not said authorization. On the recording, my voice was thin. "Use whatever is needed for restoration," I said, and then the full sentence continued. "For my care, for the recovery grants, for what we already promised. I trust you to carry it while I'm down. But don't change the designations without me." The room heard the words Celia had cut off. The clipped sentence had sounded like permission. The full sentence was a restriction. No one shouted. That made it worse for Celia. The board did not need outrage to understand what had happened. Pastor Glenn asked the secretary to mark the timestamp where the clip had been cut. Marcus quietly said the shortened audio file was attached to the packet folder too. Celia turned on him. "You do not know what was attached." Marcus did not retreat this time. "I printed the folder index before coming here," he said. "There is a short file and a long file. The short one was uploaded the same day as the final packet. The long one was never linked to the board packet." Celia's next move was not panic. It was sacrifice. "I prepared summaries," she said. "Aaron was overwhelmed, and Ellie was unreachable. I made judgment calls to keep the board from drowning in raw material. If a shorter clip was attached, that was for clarity, not deception." Then she looked at me with wounded disappointment. "Ellie knows I have carried ugly administrative work so she could be loved as the face of this ministry. I never wanted credit. I only wanted order." There was her personal interest, finally showing through the polished surface. Celia did not want money first. She wanted authorship without visibility. She had built the rails, cleaned the mess, softened Aaron's orders, and watched me receive the prayers, the letters, the gratitude. She had told herself that taking control was not theft because she had been doing the hidden work. That made her more dangerous, not less. She could turn resentment into procedure and call it service. I said, "Hidden work does not give you the right to cut my words." Aaron stepped in before she could answer. "Enough. This is exactly the strain I warned about. Ellie is turning on everyone who protected her." He looked at Pastor Glenn. "I am asking for a pastoral care pause. No donor calls, no staff interviews, no more document handling until Ellie has a medical clearance and until we can meet privately as husband and wife." A pause meant time for files to change, stories to harden, and donors to be soothed with words I did not write. Then Renee broke the silence with one sentence that made Aaron's face go still. "There is already a correction letter drafted in Ellie's name." For a second, nobody moved. Then Pastor Glenn asked, "What correction letter?" Renee placed her phone face up on the table. Celia sent Marcus instructions from her personal account after Maribel questioned the transfer. She told him not to use the word restricted in the correction note. "I forwarded the message to you before I walked in." The room moved toward Renee so quickly that Aaron's chair scraped the floor. Celia leaned forward, not angry enough to look guilty, but too quickly to look innocent. "That message is being taken out of context," she said. Renee did not raise her voice. "Then give the context with your hands off the system." That sentence landed harder than a shout because it removed the one thing Celia needed most, control of the live files. Marcus covered his mouth, then dropped his hand because hiding looked like guilt. "That message is real," he said. I didn't answer it. I printed it and put it in my car because I panicked. Aaron stopped defending Celia and stepped between her and the board without moving from his chair. "This is exactly why I asked for executive discretion," he said. "A sick founder, a nervous bookkeeper, a donor liaison with partial emails, and an admin trying to hold operations together. You are turning a ministry crisis into a trial." Then he turned to me, and his voice lowered into the private tone he used when he wanted the room to feel like strangers. "Ellie, please, don't let them do this to us." That sentence hit the deepest place in me because he had built years of leverage inside the word us. Us had meant the early rent checks, the hospital visits, the first prayer circle, the nights we ate crackers for dinner so a recovery grant could go out on time. Then slowly, us became a rope. If I questioned a decision, I was hurting us. If I asked for receipts, I was doubting us. If I got sick and needed rest, I was endangering us. Now he was using the same word in front of witnesses, hoping I would still hear marriage when he meant control. I did not answer him first. I turned to Pastor Glenn. "No private meeting," I said. "No private ride home. No private correction letter written in my name." The words were simple, but they moved the power in the room. Aaron's mouth tightened because I had named the exact doorway he had been trying to reopen. Celia looked down because she understood the next question before anyone asked it. Pastor Glenn asked, "Was there a correction letter prepared in Ellie's name?" Celia said no. At the same time, Aaron said, "There were drafts." The two answers collided so hard that no one needed a legal explanation. The cover had split by accident. The board secretary opened the email system from her own access, not Celia's. Pastor Glenn stood behind her, and Marcus gave the folder path without touching the keyboard. They found drafts in a campaign folder labeled for donor updates. Celia immediately said the folder was old. Marcus said the timestamp was from that morning. The secretary clicked once, and a scheduled message appeared with my name at the bottom. It was set to send that afternoon to every major donor. Pastor Glenn read the first lines aloud because the board needed to hear what had almost gone out. The message said I was stepping away from leadership to focus on treatment. It said Aaron would oversee restoration decisions with Celia's operational support. It thanked donors for trusting a transition that I had prayerfully approved. The room did not erupt. It went colder than that. The damage was no longer theoretical. In less than an hour, Aaron and Celia would have used my illness to remove my voice in front of the people who trusted me most. If that message had gone out, donors would not have seen theft. They would have seen a sad update. They would have prayed for me, thanked Aaron for carrying the burden, and sent kind notes to an inbox Celia controlled. I would have woken tomorrow to sympathy for a decision I never made. That was the brilliance of it, and the cruelty. They had not planned to drag me out. They had planned to bless me off the stage. Celia recovered first. "Drafts are not actions," she said. "In a crisis, leaders prepare language. Ellie has had good days and bad days. Aaron asked me to prepare options in case she needed rest. That is not deception, that is continuity." She looked toward the older board members, the ones who hated conflict and loved process. "If you punish preparation, you punish the people who kept things from collapsing while Ellie was unavailable." Aaron grabbed that line. "Exactly," he said. "No one sent it. We were waiting, we were trying to protect her dignity." Then he turned to me again. "You told me you were tired. You told me you could not keep carrying all of this." That was another trap with a true peace inside it. I had said I was tired. I had said I needed healing. I had never said he could turn my need for healing into a transfer of power. I opened the journal to the page with the ribbon. I did not offer Aaron the book. I read from it myself. "If I need treatment, pause decisions that require my name. Do not send a letter from me unless I speak it or sign it after rest. Restoration cannot be built by rushing someone out of her own calling." I closed the journal before anyone could ask to pass it around. That entry is dated 3 days before the first transition draft. It is dated before Maribel's complaint. It is dated before Aaron told you I had approved the change. I wrote it when nobody in this room was asking me to prove anything. Aaron reached for my prayer journal as if the board had not just heard Celia cut my voice apart and prepare a donor letter in my name. I pulled it back before his fingers touched the cover, and the room went still for a different reason. For the first time that morning, Aaron was not defending a mistake. He was trying to take the one thing that still carried my own dated words. Pastor Glenn saw it too, and he said Aaron's name once, low and sharp, like a door closing. Aaron lifted both hands and tried to make the grab look harmless. "I was only going to help organize the evidence," he said. "She is exhausted. Everyone can see that." But the sentence landed wrong now. An hour earlier, it might have sounded like concern. After the full recording and the scheduled email, it sounded like another hand over my mouth. Pastor Glenn did not ask me to calm down. He asked the board secretary to start a written preservation list. "The journal stays with Ellie," he said. "The recording stays copied to the church archive. The donor records stay untouched. The packet versions stay printed and sealed. No one opens the shared folders until we decide who has authority to touch them." That changed the room at once. Celia had survived every earlier blow by offering to manage the mess. Now management itself had become suspicious. Celia adjusted faster than Aaron did. Her face softened, and her voice became small, almost wounded. "I understand why this looks bad," she said. "But if you freeze me out, you freeze the only person who knows where everything is. I built the system because Ellie asked me to. I kept backups because Aaron was overwhelmed. If I made a bad clip, it was because I thought the board needed clarity, not chaos." That was her new strategy. She was no longer denying control. She was turning control into sacrifice. For a moment, the board had to sit inside that claim. Celia had been helpful for years. She remembered birthdays, chased receipts, answered donors at midnight, and made broken calendars work. That was why the betrayal had teeth. She had not forced her way into the ministry. I had opened the door for her. I had trusted her with names, needs, prayer requests, and the quiet records of people who came for help when they had nothing left to sell. Celia knew that history could still protect her if she said the right words. I felt the old pull to soften the accusation. It came from habit, not doubt. I had spent years protecting people from the full weight of their own choices. I had called patterns stress. I had called pressure leadership. I had called Aaron's public corrections concern because that word hurt less than control. But when I looked down at the journal under my hand, I remembered why I brought it. It was not a diary. It was a record of what I had prayed before anybody needed a version of me they could use. Pastor Glenn asked Marcus to explain the folder history in plain words. Marcus swallowed hard and did not look at Celia. "There were 3 versions of the authorization packet," he said. "The first one did not have Ellie's approval page. The second one added it after my login was disabled. The third one moved that page to the front, so it looked like she approved everything from the beginning." He tapped the printout with one finger. "I could not have done that. My access was already gone." Celia leaned forward before the board could absorb it. "Marcus is leaving out context," she said. "His access was disabled because he mishandled restricted accounts. He has every reason to shift blame." It was a cleaner attack than before. She did not call him a liar outright. She made him look motivated. Marcus flinched because there was a piece of truth buried inside it. He had made small mistakes. He had missed labels. He had been scared enough to stay quiet when the first number looked wrong. Celia knew exactly where to press because she had trained him. Renee cut in before Marcus folded. "If Marcus mishandled restricted accounts, why did you ask him to backdate a correction after Maribel questioned the transfer?" Pastor Glenn asked Renee to repeat that. Renee did, slower. Celia told Marcus not to use the word restricted. The board secretary looked from Renee's phone to the scheduled donor draft on the screen. Then she said the quiet sentence that made the room understand the shape of it. "The public message removes Ellie. The private instruction removes the word restricted. The packet removes the original sequence." Nobody needed her to finish the thought. Different documents, same direction. Pastor Glenn did not raise his voice. "No one is taking Ellie into a private meeting. No one is moving that journal. No one is deleting drafts, donor lists, recordings, or packet versions. Secretary, please record that the board is freezing communications access for Aaron and Celia until we finish a formal review." The board secretary repeated the motion in plain words, and that mattered. It took the decision out of the fog. It made the room hear the consequence. Aaron and Celia would not send one more message in my name. They would not touch the donor folders. They would not rewrite the past while calling it care. Celia changed tactics before the vote finished. She stopped looking wounded and became helpful. "I can give you every file," she said quickly. "I know where everything is. If you lock me out now, you'll lose the structure. You need me to explain how the packets were built." That was Celia's gift. She could make her own access sound like the only path to order. She had done it for years. She had made herself the bridge between my ideas and everyone else's memory. If she held the folders, she held the meaning. If she held the meaning, she could decide which version of me survived. Renee leaned forward. "Then explain it with your hands off the system." Celia's face tightened, not enough for everyone to notice, but enough for me. The board secretary opened a separate laptop and shared the access log on the screen. Marcus stood behind his chair, pale but steady, and pointed to the line that mattered. His account had been disabled before the later edits. The version that changed the restricted funds could not honestly be blamed on him. That one line did not tell the whole truth, but it broke the false one. Aaron tried another road. "This is becoming a spectacle," he said. "If donors hear we are fighting over internal language, the ministry could collapse. Ellie built this with prayer. Do you want her legacy to be a scandal?" There it was, the pressure he had saved for last. He was not only threatening me with shame, he was threatening me with the loss of the work I loved. He knew I would rather be hurt quietly than let vulnerable people be hurt publicly. He knew my first instinct was to absorb damage so no one else had to feel it. For one breath, I felt that old instinct rise in my chest. Apologize, smooth it over, protect the name, pay the cost yourself. Then I looked at the scheduled donor email again. It still carried my name at the bottom. It still claimed I was stepping away. It still prepared people to accept Aaron and Celia as the new voice of the ministry. I understood with painful clarity that silence would not protect the work. Silence was the tool they had used to take it. I opened the prayer journal to the dated entry Pastor Glenn had protected, but I did not read the same lines again. I turned to the next page, where my handwriting was weaker and larger from the morning after the fever broke. "I wrote this when I knew I was too weak to attend a meeting," I said. It says, "If I cannot speak clearly, wait. Do not use my absence as agreement. Healing cannot be rushed by people who want access." No one answered right away. The sentence was simple. That was why it landed. I had not written a legal argument. I had written a warning to myself, and now the warning had become a boundary. Pastor Glenn asked the secretary to copy the date, the page number, and the exact wording into the minutes. Then he asked me one question. "Do you want the donor transition emails stopped?" I said yes. He asked, "Do you want Aaron or Celia to speak for you today?" I said no. He asked, "Do you want this board to preserve the original records and notify donors that a review is underway?" I closed the journal with both hands. "Yes. And I want the restricted gifts returned to their stated purpose before anyone talks about reputation." That was the moment Aaron's control cracked in public. Not because he shouted, not because he confessed. It cracked because I stopped answering the question he wanted asked. He wanted everyone to ask whether I was well enough to resist him. I made them ask whether he had the right to keep using my name. Those were not the same question. Once the room heard the difference, Aaron could not turn it back into concern. Celia saw it too, and she moved to save herself. "Aaron told me the board had already agreed," she said. "He said Ellie would not remember the details, and that we needed to keep things stable." I should have pushed back, but I did not create the plan. Aaron turned on her so fast that even Renee looked startled. "You clipped the audio," he said. "You built the draft. You told Marcus to soften the correction." Celia's eyes flashed. "Because you said donors would panic if the word restricted appeared. You said Ellie was too sick to understand what delay would cost." The room heard the partnership split open. Neither of them meant to tell the truth. They were only trying to hand the blame away, but each sentence gave the board another piece. Aaron had used marriage, illness, and public reputation as cover. Celia had used administrative access, clipped records, and donor language as tools. Marcus had been set up as the convenient error. I had been treated as a signature, not a person. The restricted gift had been treated as flexible because the people holding the keys wanted it flexible. When Pastor Glenn finally stopped them, his voice was lower than before. "Enough. The board has what it needs for immediate action." The vote was not dramatic, but its consequences were. Aaron's and Celia's access was frozen before anyone left the room. The scheduled donor email was cancelled while everyone watched. A preservation notice went out to the board, the bookkeeper, and the outside reviewer. Marcus's name was removed from the correction draft that had blamed him for the altered language. Maribel Keene's original donor designation was marked controlling until the review finished. Every packet version was exported and sealed. The board secretary printed the cancellation confirmation and placed it beside my journal, not as a decoration, but as proof that one false future had been stopped before it reached the people who trusted me. Aaron still had one card left, and it was the cruelest one because it belonged to our private life. He turned to me, no longer performing for the room. "After everything I carried while you were sick, this is how you repay me," he said. That sentence hurt more than his accusations, because it carried pieces of truth inside it. He had driven me to appointments. He had answered calls when my voice failed. He had stood near my bed with medicine and updates and a hand on the door. That was why the betrayal had worked. He had not been a stranger forcing his way in. He had been close enough to turn care into leverage. I let myself feel the cost before I answered. I did not pretend the marriage wound was small. I did not pretend the ministry wound was the only wound. "You did carry some things," I said, "and then you used what you carried to take what was not yours." Aaron's mouth opened, but I kept going before he could reshape it. "I am not going into a private room with you today. I am not asking the board to soften this to protect your image. I am not calling theft concern just because it came through someone who knew my pain." My voice shook on the last word, but it did not break. That was enough. Renee's payoff came quietly. She had been the one who refused to let the old donor address pass as a small mistake. She had pushed until the stale list became proof of a hidden export. Now Pastor Glenn asked her to help draft the first honest donor notice, not as my substitute, but as a witness to the correction. Renee looked at me first. I nodded. That mattered too. Help was no longer someone taking over while calling me fragile. Help was someone making room for my own decision to stand. Marcus was asked to rebuild the donor records under two-person oversight. His hands shook when he accepted because the false blame had nearly cost him his name. Now the same system that had been used to frame him would carry a record clearing him. Celia's collapse came in stages. First she asked to resign quietly. Then she asked to keep access for one afternoon to organize the handoff. Then she asked whether the review could avoid naming her in donor communications. Each request sounded practical. Each request protected the same thing. Pastor Glenn denied all three. "You may provide a written account through the reviewer," he said. "You will not touch the files." Celia looked toward me then, almost pleading, as if years of shared work should still buy her one last mercy. I felt the pull of it. Celia had sat beside me through hard seasons. Celia had prayed over meetings. Celia had known which days I was too tired to argue. But knowing someone's weakness is not the same as loving them. I did not look away. I said, "Tell the truth without my access in your hand." By late afternoon, the first correction was ready. It did not expose private details. It did not turn pain into spectacle. It told donors that an unauthorized transition message had been stopped, that restricted gifts were being reviewed and honored, and that no leadership change would be announced in my name without my direct approval and board confirmation. The words were plain. That was their strength. Aaron had counted on confusion. Celia had counted on polished language. I chose clarity. Before the notice went out, Pastor Glenn asked whether I wanted to add a scripture line. I chose only one, from John, about truth making people free. I did not use it like a weapon. I used it like a door opening. The consequences moved faster than I expected. Maribel Keene's family responded first, not with anger, but with relief that the designation had been found before the money disappeared into general expenses. Two smaller donors asked for written confirmation of where their gifts had gone. The outside reviewer requested the full audio, packet history, and all communications tied to the transition draft. Aaron was told to step away from all ministry operations while the review proceeded. Celia's admin role ended that day. When the room finally emptied, I sat alone at the board table with my prayer journal closed beneath my hand. For months, Aaron had called that journal proof that I was too emotional to lead. Celia had treated it like a loose object she could explain away. But it had done what I could not do on the days my body failed me. It had stayed, it had remembered, it had kept the dates when I was too tired to defend them. I did not feel victorious in the way people imagine victory. I felt tired. I felt sad. I felt clean. The healing fund was not fully repaired yet. My marriage was not magically solved. The review would take weeks, maybe months. But one thing had changed in that room, and it could not be undone. My weakness was no longer their permission. My silence was no longer their cover. And the next time someone asked who had the right to speak for Morning Light, my name would not appear at the bottom of a lie. It would come from my own mouth.